No, it's completely.
That isn't one of the weaker arguments, but it is an argument.
It's not a.
And it calls for special pleading.
If you're going to say, exactly.
The first premise fails.
For your case, it's special pleading. Because everything has to be created except God. That is special pleading.
Okay, so I'll grant you the first premise then. Let's say that I don't. Concrete. Okay, let's forget that. I think that concrete. We know where I stand. I believe it fails at the first premise, but for the sake of this argument, I'll grant you the first premise. Now, what's the second premise? The universe began to exist. Is that correct? Is that the second premise? Do I have that right? We don't know that. Could have always been here.
Yes, we do.
No, we don't. No,
we go back to Planck time. We don't know what happened before Planck time.
Let me ask everybody a question. Everybody talks about the Big Bang. Has anybody ever heard of, and this is my personal belief, has anybody ever heard of the Big Bounce theory?
Sure.
I believe it's Big Bounce. I believe that sounds the most logical to me.
Could be infinite regression. Yes,
there's a big crunch.
But now where the Kalam really fails is with the conclusion. Therefore, God, because even if we granted the universe had a beginning, just to say it was God, therefore God, that's ridiculous. I might as well say therefore a big fat man in a pink tutu eating an ice cream cone on Jupiter. It doesn't mean anything.
No. The Kalam theory runs along these lines. Given the premises that 1 and 2 are true, it logically follows that the conclusion the universe had a cause of its existence is true as well.
Right, and that cause can't be the universe. It has to be something beyond the universe.
And that could be in a cause too, right? Unless
what do you give? Well, it's whatever is beyond the universe you're calling God.
That is by definition special pleading.
But that didn't get you to Christianity. It didn't get you to the Christian God.
How does it get you? I don't think it gets you to any God. It just
Oh no, I was granting if it even got you there, even if it got you to a God, it doesn't get you to the Christian God.
Even if we say it had a cause, who's to say that cause is a God? I mean, it's just you can't say that. That's just ridiculous. It's a horrible argument.
So what's your reason then for the cause, Jeff?
I have no fucking idea. I'm not a physicist or anything else. I am a philosopher. Let me finish. Don't ever talk me. Let me finish.
I'm like that boy.
Let me finish. Don't ever talk me.
Don't ever talk to me like that boy.
Don't overtalk me, and don't try to insult me. You think you want to call me a boy? You want to measure penises? You want to measure penises? What? Don't overtalk me. You pig-faced fuck.
Do you guys like to have rooms like this, or do you want to have a conversation? Hey,
Gavin, shut the fuck up and let me finish. Fucking hell, man.
Gavin, have you been in other rooms where people don't yell rubbish at you and overtalk you all the time?
No, James, I have not.
Anyway,
did you send them down?
Jesus is.
So what I was saying. Is I'm a philosophical agnostic.
God, fuck you! I don't want to be in any fucking room with you, you fucking asshole.
All right, bye-bye. Hey, Jeff. The reason that the conclusion gets you to God is because whatever is beyond the universe that created the universe has to have these certain properties by definition.
What's the argument for that? Give me the argument for that. It's a cool claim. What's the argument?
Yeah, if time was created in the universe, then the thing is timeless. Do you just go through the attributes like that?
So Do we know that time was created, or is time contingent? I don't know that. Do you?
No, I'm not. I'm not making the argument for it. I'm just saying that is the argument for the third for the conclusion.
Well, I just said we don't know. Hey, Biscuit, you're in the audience. Is time a contingent thing? I don't know.
No, I believe in even closer to a B theory of time.
Yeah, so
kind of deal.
Yeah, I think that space and time are an emergent property. So they're not fundamental in my opinion.
And we don't know that the universe began to exist.
Jeff, you think you're going to be able to get out of the Kalam by just saying, "Oh, I don't have ultimate knowledge, therefore I don't believe in anything that's going on"? You think that's going to be satisfactory?
I gave you the reasons why I reject both the premises and the conclusion.
Yes, and they boil down to you don't know. So therefore, you think that's satisfactory that you don't know?
But that's what concrete.
We don't hold to position.
That's literally how arguments work. Oh my gosh.
Well,
the burden's on the person making the Kalam to make their argument for their premises.
It's real simple that we can not know things with ultimate certainty and still come to conclusions.
I'm unconvinced by your argument.
You're saying that in all your years and all your analysis, you have yet to come to a conclusion. Therefore, that's a defeater to the Kalam.
No, that's not what I said. I gave you the logical, what I feel are logical contradictions in both of the premises and in the conclusion. We can go back through them again.
Where's the contradiction? Sorry.
Okay. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Is that the first one? Right?
Yes.
That's the first premise? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
No, I don't accept that. We don't know that. No one knows that.
I don't know. That's exactly what you were going to say.
Right? Because we don't know. And anybody that says they do know is just taking a leap of faith, pretending.
We don't know.
Assuming that's true.
Who's this we?
Then God must also have a cause. So that there goes a problem. Infinite regression. Okay? Anyway, we're talking about. Are we talking about Jesus, the guy that's supposed to, the savior of humanity, right? He can't even save himself. Okay, how is he supposed to save humanity? What a joke.
Good story, bro.
The thief on the cross said that to Jesus. That was a funny joke. But the reason that God Himself wouldn't break down that first premise is because God didn't begin to exist. Right, so the first premise is anything that begins to exist has a cause, and I think what Jeff says, just to land real quick, what Jeff is saying is that we don't know for sure that everything that begins to exist has a cause, and I think he's right when he says that. But we also don't know that all men are mortal. Socrates is mortal, therefore Socrates is a man. We haven't tested every man's mortality. It's just it's a good assumption. It's a logical assumption until we find evidence to the contrary. Is the idea?
But Biscuit, where do you get the idea that God's immortal and God didn't have a beginning? Besides saying it, where do you get it from?
That's what's being posited, right? In the argument, what's being posited is a particular kind of deity. So, you're right that there are certain legends and myths about deities which have a beginning and deities which but we're talking about, I assume, the Judeo-Christian God. The Kalam cosmological argument, the Kalam school was an Islamic school, so this is the Western idea of God we're talking about.
Well, you can think of it like this. Before we were to construct these, complex arguments for why it's necessary to have an uncaused first cause, the goat herders had already written down that God was the Alpha and the Omega, beginning and the end, with no beginning. So there you go. It wasn't something that we just posited. It was something that was written down, something that was concluded by logical reasoning, and lo and behold, it stands up.
Logical reasoning by the goat herders?
It was written down by the goat herders. We later reasoned to it that there had to be an uncaused first cause. And lo and behold, it still stands with no alternate explanation.
Well,
viable.
There's plenty of alternate explanations. You just don't accept those alternate.
Viable explanation.
Logical alternative explanations.
If we have a lack of understanding of how something begins, does that give us reason to conclude that God is the foundation for that?
No, it does not.
Thank you very much. That's my whole point. That's my whole point. That's my whole point of why the Kalam fails. Thank you.
Yeah, but
Well,
the people the people who purport the Kalam are not reaching the conclusion based on not what they don't understand. They're reaching the conclusion based on what they do understand.
Thank you.
Jeff, here's your problem. You don't believe the Kalam argument, that's fine, but when asked for an alternative view for the start of the universe, or for the universe and for life, you say, I don't know, but it can't possibly be God. How do you know it can't possibly be God?
Nobody said
I didn't say that. I never said it can't possibly be God. I said that anybody that
Don't play games with me, son. Don't play games with me. That's what
Gavin, why are you being a condescending prick by calling me boy and son? I'm not your boy and I'm not your son. So go fuck that shit, okay, dude?
Well,
take that shit and shove it straight up your fucking ass. All right?
Well,
I'm not gonna put up with your. I'm not gonna put up with your disrespect, you little pig-faced fuck.
Leave. You can leave then.
All right, shut the
Run away.
Shut the fuck up. No, I'm not running away.
Run away.
I'm not running away.
Well,
everybody see the great Christians. See how Christians.
So again, here's the problem with your argument.
Christian street people.
You don't believe the Kalam argument. You don't believe it. You don't believe it.
This is what they do.
And then when asked for a different interpretation or a different reason, you go, I don't know. But it can't be God.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah. Well, I you know, the thing is, Gavin, I don't know how everything began, but that doesn't mean that if you say elves, that by default you're right because you've got some kind of a made up answer.
Yeah, that's straw man, bro.
Exactly.
It's not a matter of made up answers. The people have reasoned to this.
I don't have a made up answer.
They've come up with arguments, and you don't have counter arguments. You don't have alternate explanations that are viable.
I'm going to make it up.
The only thing you can do is undermine.
Not only do they make delicious cookies, they also made the universe.
Not having an explanation is not evidence for your position.
Oh, awesome! More rhetoric, right?
The person making the claim.
Jeff, I'm in the middle of a statement, bro. So, what we want more than rhetoric and like appeals to skepticism is an actual, tangible, logical argument that we can see with our own eyes, right? Do you have that?
I mean, it's possible that I don't have that, but me not.
So now, what do we do?
But wait a second. Me not having that doesn't mean or doesn't provide support for your position. It does. Equally the case that you. No, it doesn't. It could be equally the case that you don't actually have any evidence for your position as well.
But we don't. We do have evidence.
Okay, what is that evidence?
Logical argumentation.
So your position to prove that God exists is just through logical.
No, look. What it is a cumulative argument that it includes logical argumentation. It includes personal witness. It includes the efficacious nature of prayer. It includes the validity of scripture, so on and so forth.
Wait a minute. So what you just mentioned.
So what we've done is we've looked at all of these things. We've looked at all of these things in tandem, and we've come to the conclusion: yes, God exists.
So you mentioned logical propositions, but then you rattled off.
Part of the conversation
that really don't mean anything.
This isn't part of the conversation. Let me just
maybe not to you.
Well, personal.
I'm not trying to join in on the conversation. I just want to ask the mod something real quick. Is there a reason why that Xbox F was dropped down? Because he wasn't arguing with anybody. All of a sudden, he just got dropped down.
Yeah, he likes to overtalk in the middle of people speaking, and I just dropped him down. But I brought him back up, and then he went back down. So
okay,
he's back up now.
Yeah, I'm back up. Thanks, conservative.
But you were just saying that, like you mentioned, logical propositions, logical arguments as proof for the existence of God. But then you routed off personal prayer, personal experiences, and then other very subjective, intangible viewpoints that aren't really evidence for God. So really, you're only left with logical propositions.
Yeah, so
Which
you
one
don't
of
know
those
what evidence is.
doesn't count as
You don't know.
evidence
You
for
don't know
God?
what evidence is. You don't know what evidence is if you think someone's personal experience is not evidence. You don't know what
I agree.
evidence is.
You could
So you don't
consider
know
it.
what evidence is.
I can give you 5
don't
lines
think
of
the efficacious nature of prayer.
The efficacious nature of prayer is proof for the existence of God.
Yes.
And could you provide me an example of the efficacious nature of prayer that is actual positive evidence that would support God?
We should stop using proof and evidence synonymously. They're not synonymous.
I would agree with that. So, like you're saying, like you have evidence. You have evidence for situations where prayer is evidence for God. Prayer is evidence for God.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What's the problem?
Is it me? I can't. He seems to be roboting. Maybe
you're in the matrix. You're in the matrix, concrete. We can't hear you.
But I've heard this argument before about the efficacious nature of prayer. But really, there's not any substantial support for this empirically. There's been a lot of studies that would suggest that prayer essentially is the same. It's no more or less relevant to like positive outcomes than just chance.
Yeah, than chance. Yeah. That's all I've seen from the studies as well.
Yeah.
And they did do some pretty comprehensive studies. It's not like these studies were just a few people and
large data sets, and not only that, they found out in some cases that those that were being prayed for actually did worse.
Yeah, it's easy to make claims, eh?
Well, you're the one.
Those aren't claims; those are scientific studies. You can go look them up for yourself.
Yeah, they're just claims coming from your mouth.
Well,
I think most claims come from people's mouths. You're a damn philosophy major, aren't you?
Since we're gonna appeal the studies, John Lee told us about a study where they put a bunch of atheists on lie detector tests, and all the atheists failed. So, yeah, no atheists exist. Stop.
I don't even know what that means.
Which part did you understand? The lie detectors don't work? Part, the atheist part, or the failed?
I don't understand how it's relevant to the conversation that atheists took lie detector tests and they failed. What does that mean?
I'm not hearing what you're saying.
What part don't you understand? Which part is hard to understand?
You're breaking up. You're breaking up. You're breaking up, concrete. That sounds funny. You're breaking up, concrete.
I mean, I understand what Concrete is saying. He's like, what part of this don't you understand? I don't understand its context of saying atheists got put on lie detector tests and they were lying. So if an atheist is lying, how is that relevant to the position that God does or doesn't exist? Atheists can be liars. I mean, big deal.
That's a good point.
The theist has got 5 objective lines of evidence that he appeals to. The first one is the scientific evidence for God's existence. The second one is the historical documentation. The third one is expert witness testimony. Fourth one is archaeological evidence that lines up with everything in the Bible. The fourth one is eyewitness testimony, and the last one is prophecy in the Bible, events that were written centuries before they occurred, and they were fulfilled as per the prophecy. You won't find any other book on the planet that does the same thing. So, atheists, what are your lines of evidence that God does not exist?
Well, let's just go.
Well, I reject every. Yeah, can we go through those claims one at a time?
Let's go through those.
One
Sure.
at a time.
Let's go through them. Yeah, sure.
What's the first one?
Yeah, the scientific
evidence.
What's
scientific evidence.
What is the scientific evidence for that?
The scientific evidence is that time and space is not fundamental to the universe.
I don't even understand what.
Yeah, and that proves God how?
If you just hold on to your nappies there, Jeff, because space and time is not fundamental to the universe, what is being universally accepted now is that at the very fundamental level of the universe is information.
And this proves God how?
And Jeff, you got to hold on to your nappies. You know, I know your training bra's getting tight.
I thought you stopped talking. I thought you were done. You stopped talking. I thought you were done.
When I stop talking, that means I'm thinking. You know. So because time and space is not fundamental, but information is fundamental to the universe. Information is immaterial, right? You'd agree with that, eh?
Information is immaterial? Yes, I would agree.
Yeah, right. But information doesn't just poof appear by itself. Information requires a mind.
I'm still waiting for the scientific evidence. I haven't really heard anything.
And that's why.
Maybe you don't understand that.
Well, he's mentioning several things, but I don't see how any of these are actual scientifically supported evidence.
If you'd shut your mouth,
you know what science
if you'd shut your mouth, and this is why concepts like the holographic principle are widely accepted by all astrophysicists, scientists involved in that field. So, the other good point is that there are very few. There's not many around the world, but I think there's 3 in the US. There's one in the University of Virginia, and it's a branch of the university called the Division of Perceptual Studies. And after 50 years of research, they have determined that the supernatural is a fact, and science is going to have to come to grips with this fact somehow. That's a quote from one of their researchers.
What is supernatural?
You don't know what the word supernatural is? I'm sure you can Google it.
I know what the word is. I'm asking you. You said scientists they've proved it, and now scientists are going to have to agree with it. I'm asking what supernatural fact is proven.
Well, would you like me to link you to hundreds of peer review papers about this topic?
Well, Gavin, what's your definition of supernatural? What is
great question. Fantastic.
What is supernatural?
What is supernatural is an event or something that occurs outside of our natural realm.
Okay, great, excellent.
Drop me a link in the main chat out there.
Excellent, that's great, Gavin.
I'll drop you enough links to keep you going for the rest of the year, but I know you're not going to read them.
I'll read them if they have to do with supernatural.
No,
You'll be able to tell from the abstract if they deal with the supernatural.
No,
right?
you won't read them. Atheists don't read those things.
So something is supernatural.
No, go ahead, drop them.
It's outside the natural world. So what is your methodology for evaluating whether something is supernatural? Or what would be the methodology?
It's not my methodology.
Okay,
It's the methodology that the researchers used.
Okay. Well, I'm unaware of any peer-reviewed paper that has documented a methodology for identifying the supernatural. Mainly because something which is supernatural or outside the natural world, there is no methodology for evaluating outside of the natural world. So I don't know what that would be.
Well, nature is just as poorly defined as supernatural is. It's like, what do you mean when you say nature? Do you mean able to be repeated in a laboratory? Do you mean spatio-temporal? Like, what are we even talking about when we use those terms?
Well, I mean, we use the term natural systems fairly loosely, but typically we're talking about the world as we know it, the natural world. And science, the scientific method is based on evaluations of the natural world, the physical world, and all, the biological, ecological, geochemical, etc. But when you say supernatural, outside of that kind of broad reference of the natural world of which science works under, then I don't. This gets into this issue of methodological naturalism. Like, how do you know what is supernatural if you have no method to actually evaluate something which is outside the natural world?
Right, but I'm wondering if it really matters. Like, if I were to say space and time, classical space and time, came into existence 13.7 billion years ago. So whatever is the antecedent cause of space and time is not spatio-temporal. Does that change what you think that cause is as far as quote-unquote nature? When physicists are talking about physics, they're talking about space-time objects. So if we're looking for something outside of space and time, which is fundamental, and you're still willing to call that natural, well, okay, fine. But I think we kind of get caught in the weeds when we're saying, oh, well, that's natural. Well, this is supernatural. No, it's natural. Who cares, right? We're looking at the same phenomenon. And so if we come to the conclusion that what is fundamental is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, and intelligent or conscious, then whether or not the scientist can test for that reality or not doesn't change what we're dealing with, right? We're dealing with a spaceless, timeless, immaterial intelligence, which most theists would call God, regardless of whether or not you can find that in the laboratory. So if the atheist is content to say, oh, okay, well, I'm fine with God as long as we can study him, well, then fine. You know, I guess that's okay. But if you're saying there's nothing supernatural and everything is only natural, it's just tough to derive any meaning out of that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that's a very coherent perspective. One view would be that if you identify something that you perceived as supernatural initially, and you can use naturalistic mechanism to evaluate it, it's actually you could not consider it not supernatural. Maybe God is not supernatural, and at some point in the future, we'll be able to detect this immaterial mind through naturalistic mechanisms. But when theists say there is something which is supernatural, this seems incoherent to me. If you want to say God exists, but I don't really care about the supernatural term, I think it's just a bullshit term. I think that's more reasonable to say. I just don't understand what
you have dispositions that preclude you from understanding what supernatural is. You have other commitments that preclude you from doing it, because that just seems to be like very dishonest, right?
I just don't think it's uninteresting and not useful to say something is supernatural. You could just say it's an unknown. We just don't know.
This is like gotta be the weakest argument against. I mean, you're basically like quibbling over words.
Well, I don't know if I'm quibbling over words. I'm just only making a point that theists tend to represent God as a supernatural being, and I don't really quite know what that means.
You do know what it means because it has a definition.
He's beyond nature.
I don't even know what that means, beyond nature.
Look, man, it would mean out.
So you see why
outside of the universe or beyond the universe.
Well, is that what it means? Beyond the universe?
You see why atheists are so ridiculed, right? Because you're instead of like forwarding the conversation, you're like stagnating the conversation.
I don't think
you're doing so in the least, and you're doing so in the least important ways possible. I don't like this word. I think this word is dumb.
I was enjoying the conversation personally. I don't think he was. I think the conversation was going forward great.
Whether or not you enjoyed it doesn't mean we're
semantics make up everything.
We could be literally moving in circles. You could find it enjoyable, and that will in no way, shape, or form refute my position that he is stagnating the conversation by quibbling about minutia. I don't like this word. I don't think we should use it.
Well, but words have meanings, and when you talk about the aspects of when you talk about those aspects of supernaturalism and you define your God as this supernatural being, it creates an incoherent discussion. If you were a theist and you were actually being intellectually honest,
not for anybody who's actually honest. It's not incoherent for any. What does incoherent mean to you?
Non-understandable.
All right, great. When is the definition non-understandable? Because there is a definition for supernatural. Why is it incoherent for you? Which part don't you understand because we have to explain it?
Because it has no meaning to me in how we understand our world. We have no way of understanding what something is supernatural.
How is that true if there's a definition?
It has a practical meaning.
We can have a definition of gobbledygook. That doesn't mean that it has any value in the conversation.
You're just quibbling right now, man.
Look, here's how it's not quibbling. I'll tell you how it's not quibbling. Because if a theist wants to come to the table that says, look, I'm not going to use the word supernatural for a definition of God. I'm more interested in just understanding the concepts of God, what God represents. I think that is reasonable. Like somebody else said that the supernatural is outside the universe. Somebody could make the interpretation, like a physicist could make the interpretation that outside the universe is not actually something which is supernatural, that we actually have measurable ways of evaluating our world and universe, and there are hypotheses that would suggest there could be other universes. That's a naturalistic mechanism of exploring something that is potentially outside the universe. In the same way, God may just be something that we haven't been able to detect yet through natural means. I think that's a much more reasonable perspective of theistic than to say it's just supernatural.
Oh my goodness gracious, bro. You are ridiculous. You know why? Because we can detect God through naturalistic means, which is the only means we have. Unless you're going to say we have supernatural instruments and tools at our disposal. Other than that, we only have naturalistic means.
What are the
we have detected God, and we have detected God through naturalistic means, i.e., the efficacious nature of prayer, through logical argumentation, and other
your soul.
Really, the efficacious nature of prayer. There's concrete proof that prayer works.
Yes.
And then all the other variables. Then why does prayer sometimes not work?
That's the nature of prayer. You might as well say, why does water kill people sometimes?
So sometimes it works.
Even though it is a benefit and brings forth life, it sustains life, it also kills.
Okay, it's like saying gravity works sometimes.
Hold on.
Sometimes gravity doesn't.
Are you going to say water doesn't work? Because sometimes people die.
So concrete. So sometimes prayers work and sometimes they don't. And determining when they're going to, there's no way to determine if it's going to work, if it's not going to work, but somehow there's proof that it works.
Doesn't mean it doesn't work. Sorry.
That's not proof. I mean, I could do something 1,000. You know, if I do an activity, you know, and I drop a bowling ball out of the window, and sometimes it kills people, and sometimes it doesn't. You know, and when it kills people, and there's no way for me to know when it's going to kill somebody, because I don't look out the window. I just throw the ball out there, you know, blindly, and then it kills people. And then sometimes it doesn't kill people. I can't say for a fact that dropping a bowling ball out the window kills people or doesn't kill people. I don't know. There's no way to prove when it does and when it doesn't if you're not looking out the window.
Is there a way we can go back? Is there a way we can go back?
Schrodinger's cat.
Hello. If I'm allowed,
yeah, we can hear you.
If I'm allowed to speak, I would like to raise a question. I think our friend made, in my view, a legitimate point on the limitation of nature, on what we know about nature. I think possibly would agree with me that in 19th century science or in early 20th century, what we knew about nature at the time was way more different than what we know today. So our scope is expanding and expanding. So could we come up with a definitive boundary about where the nature ends or where the supernatural starts? I think it's a legit question that our friend asked. That do theists really know where the nature ends?
Yeah, how does that in any way refute the existence of God?
No,
I mean, think we're there quite yet.
That's not what his point was.
Yeah. I mean, to come up with, to go into the realm of supernatural, first we have to come to the end of what is natural, right? Or the end of nature we have to reach.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that is true. That is true.
So then I think no scientist would tell you that where this is the point where nature ends. Do theists assume, or where do they assume the end of nature?
I think that we can.
Where does it end?
Yeah, I think we can show depending on what you mean by nature. I don't want to get back into the weeds again, but nature to me has always been space-time or synonymous with space-time. So I might say that anything is supernatural when it is beyond the functional capacity of a spatio-temporal cause or a space-time cause. I don't know if you think that's fair or not to move forward, but nature is a fuzzy term, and so must be supernatural, unfortunately. But I would say if we're talking about space-time, then tons of physicists are familiar with space and time ending. It's really easy to end it. You can end space-time at the Hadron Collider, probing for distances at 10 to the negative 33, which is the Planck distance. Time stops for light speed. Time stops at a black hole. Space stops there too. So it's really easy to come to the end of space-time, and there's multiple ways to do it. And so the question becomes, is everything outside of space-time supernatural, or do you want to move the goalpost and kind of expand the definition of natural to include that which is outside of space-time?
Like to before answering your question, may I ask you, if you put God in the supernatural realm, and what's your definition of God? Because if we know your very definition of God, I think we could move easier, I guess. Because I guess everyone's definition of God may have some nuances. So I think it's beneficial to ask what you understand by God.
There's a pretty standard.
Sorry,
it's a pretty standard. What Wago Biscuit?
Oh, sorry about that.
You can give a generic standard definition of a God that even a Christian would agree with.
Honestly, I find it very doubtful, the generic definition of God. I don't accept that there is a generic definition of God. You have your definition of God.
Hold on.
I think there is.
Let me throw one out there and then see if a Christian would agree that this is a creator God that exists outside of the universe.
Yeah, I would
or outside
say,
of the cosmos.
Yeah, I would say an unembodied mind from which matter and energy are emergent, or from which space-time is emergent.
Right. That would be. It might have more things to it, but at a base level, I think just about everybody would accept.
So in your assumption, where this time and space end, the realm of God begins, right?
No, I think that space and time are data compression tools that human beings use in order to accomplish goals. I think space and time are more evolutionary to human beings than that space and time or anything real.
Like before Planck time.
Does God start with time, or is he beyond time? Or like outside of, I guess I should say.
Sorry, I
Well,
dropped
God's. Well, can I just jump in and say, God is a spiritual entity, not like he's not like a human, but he exists concurrently in the past, the present, and the future, and he's eternal. So he transcends time.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
A couple of other things that are kind of fairly well accepted, like Biscuit was saying, God is uncaused, he's eternal, changeless, timeless, and immaterial. But importantly, God has to be a personal agent who freely elects to create an effect in time. That's a major description of God.
I would agree, Gavin, that free choice is an important component, and I don't just add that in order to endow this mind with agency. I mean that if space and time don't exist, and I know that's difficult to imagine, but in a situation where there is no space and there is no time, that would mean that the universe would either have to be eternal, or there has to be some potential that can be actualized by something like a mind, right? Because if you have oxygen and gasoline and fire, that's going to create an explosion, right? If those things are put spacelessly into like the same environment, that has to be an explosion immediately. There could be no waiting, right? The universe would be eternal if all the ingredients were spacelessly, timelessly there ad infinitum. The universe would be infinite. And so that's where I think a mind, in the way that Gavin is explaining it, makes a lot of sense. Something that can make a decision to cause at a particular, t equals 0, and not.
May I? I think there is a very typical problem, which is when you're not able to come up with an explanation, you attach the cause to a higher being. Since I don't know, and since there is no other option coming to my mind, and since science has not come up with an explanation yet, okay, then let me bind it. Let me bind that cause as a super agent, as a higher agent. Don't you think that this is something a very an easy solution? Don't you think that this is a lazy solution?
Yes,
No,
exactly correct.
No, not at all.
The reason I would, the reason I would disagree, and I would respectfully, I would return that to you. In my perspective, the person who's being lazy is someone who says "I don't know" at the end of the argument instead of at the beginning.
You know what? I tell you, my friend, I don't know is the most honest answer, which puts science ahead. I don't know. You know what? You know what?
No, hang on.
You know what?
I respect that.
We don't.
I respect that.
We
Listen,
don't say. I don't know.
One mic.
Yeah, I know.
One mic.
I wasn't quite done. I agree with you that you should say "I don't know" when you don't, right? However, pragmatism suggests that "I don't know" should be your humble beginning. We're not trying to reach knowledge on an absolute level. We're trying to see what is the best explanation given multiple competing hypotheses, even though we might not ever know the answer for sure. That's not where we stop.
But how do you know? But how do you assume
that would be lazy?
But how do you assume that the non-theists close the cover of the book after they say "we don't know"? Yeah, we don't know means
because that's
we
exactly
don't know.
That's exactly your criticism.
No.
You're
we
criticizing
don't know means,
me by
I don't know means I don't know yet. It means I'm in progress of my readings, of my research.
So I can say that. I can say the same thing.
But I don't know yet.
Right. It's very easy to say "I don't know." I say the same thing. Trust me, we're on the same level there. The only difference between the two of us is I say I don't know, but here's what I think the best explanation is, given multiple competing hypotheses, and that opens a discussion. And it opens a discussion that's not based on. Hang on, I'm about to land. Hang on, I'm about to land. I'm about to land right here.
One mic.
It opens a discussion to where, I mean, yeah, I don't know is a fine answer to give. It can also be a lazy answer. So when I ask someone, how did the universe begin, saying I don't know, is not an answer to the question, because I didn't ask what you knew. I asked what you think, and where you get the evidence for what you think, regardless of whether or not that's ontologically correct.
So, my response or my rebuttal to you about it is that actually the lazy approach is of what the theists and what the religious construction proposes. Because when you say everything is created by God in one way or another, actually you don't need any reasoning behind it. You know what? You don't need to explain anything even, because overall, at the point, at the alley, at the dead end street, you come. If you don't have any explanation, okay, then since I cannot come up with any logical explanation, okay, let me attach it to a higher being. Since this is not possible in any other way around, so okay, then let me pass it to the realm of God. You know what? You say that God. You came up with a definition. How do you put your definition of God into a conceivable, intelligible, measurable perspective? How can I not know that How can I not know that you are indeed just repeating the same old historical, collective, social schizophrenia? Because this is what you are doing. You're repeating the same old definition that we know that it emerged in a period of time in Babylonia, especially the monotheism. So you're just repeating the same old thing. So, but how do you put it into perspective, intelligible perspective? How do you put that? And
Easily. Now remember, we're talking about 6 lines of objective evidence that we have for the existence of God, and so far we've only covered the first one. We've still got 5 to go.
You mean you talk about the Coulomb argument?
No, I'm talking about 6 objective lines of evidence for God's existence,
which I still haven't heard any scientific evidence.
So far,
for the Bible.
All we've talked about
for the Bible and Jesus' existence.
All we've talked, one mic please, one mic. All we've talked about so far is the scientific evidence for God's existence.
And that was a fail.
Yeah, seems like you failed at the first one.
You would say that, but see, here's the classic atheist response, right? How you ask the atheist, right, especially on YouTube, what's your explanation for the universe and for life? The atheist will answer, I don't know, but it can't be God.
No, there are things we know and things we don't know yet.
Okay, for the atheists in the room here, one mic. For the atheists in the room here, who believes that they don't know how the universe and life came to be, but it certainly can't be God, who's the ontology of the universe and life?
I do not believe that.
I put myself in that category. I don't know how exactly the universe, I don't know exactly how the physical world exists. I just know that there's no supernatural or magical intervention.
We have some theories on the table, but we don't have a definitive answer yet. But maybe we would have one day.
Conservative. Do you have any like positive arguments for your claim?
I'm sorry, who was asking that?
Xbox.
Yeah, I don't. All I see is the physical world. I don't see any proof or any strong evidence of the supernatural world, and so I categorically deny that anything supernatural exists. Supernatural, metaphysical, magical, spiritual, whatever you want to call it.
Right. It's kind of like fiction.
Yes. Look, science has moved well beyond the classical mechanical world. Well beyond it.
Unfortunately, like what you're saying, you had scientific evidence for the existence of God. You think that that's well established. Scientific consensus and scientific views are not in alignment with that. So if you are correct, then we would have scientific consensus on the fact that God exists, but we actually don't have that whatsoever.
No, what I'm saying is, through the set of abductive reasoning, we have strong lines of objective evidence. That's important. It's objective evidence. With 6 lines of objective evidence that when you cumulatively put them together, they make a very strong case for God's existence. Now, on the flip side, please, any atheist who's here, you give us any kind of argument that's against God existing, and nah doesn't cut it.
Okay, the argument from evil, the logical argument from evil, the natural argument from evil.
Well, that's not an argument for God, for God's non-existent.
The divine hiddenness argument.
Well, God's not divinely hidden to me.
Oh, okay, great. You refuted it. Well done.
And the problem of evil is not a God problem. It's a problem of men, of humans.
Let's just go through the point by point. Your 4 or 5 or 6 whatever lines of evidence.
6. We've got 6 lines of argument.
Fair enough.
6 lines of argument.
Well, hold on a second. On the scientific one, on the first one, you haven't provided any substantial evidence that scientifically shows that God exists. And if you want to go to other ones and say that you think that those provide evidence, fine. But on point 1, that's a fail. So if you want to move to point 2, is fine. But point 1 of scientific evidence for the existence of God, if there's certainly no substantial evidence in that instance.
So hold on. Who was that? You speaking, Sona?
That's Jason.
Jason. You're a physicist, Jason?
No, I'm a climatologist.
Okay. So this is the current mainstream thinking amongst physicists of what we've been talking about with our first line of evidence. So for you to say a fail is neither here nor there, means nothing.
Well, why don't you?
So
you said you were going to provide some papers that support your position. Are you posting those somewhere?
Yeah, I've sent them to Concrete, and hopefully Concrete can send them to you because okay. I can't send them to you.
Sure, that's fine.
Concrete, they're on your back channel. If you can shoot them to Jason, that'd be awesome.
Even if it's like the top 3 papers that you think support your position, that's fine.
No, there are hundreds of peer-reviewed papers there.
Hey, then providing 3 top papers shouldn't be a problem.
Hey, one mic, all right?
All right, fine.
I know you're salivating like a dog to disprove God, but that information is pretty dense, and some of those papers you can't access for free. So if
I can access them. I have a faculty appointment. I can access them. So send them my way. I can look at them.
Okay,
I can access them as well.
Okay, so the next line of objective evidence we have for God's existence is the historical documentation. And by the historical documentation
of what? Of the Bible existing, or Jesus existing, or
yeah. The historical documentation is the internal evidence inside of the Bible and also the external evidence, external historical documentation. So,
but the whole Bible could be true and God could still be false.
Exactly.
Hardly. Given that the Bible is about God, is hardly gonna, and if it's true, it's hardly gonna mean that God is not true, isn't it? So anyway,
well, no,
I'm gonna have to move.
Gavin, I actually
What's that?
the Bible. I like the Bible. Thomas Jefferson wrote what's called the Jefferson Bible. He took the Bible and he removed all the
I know all about that.
Okay, so I like the Bible. I like Christianity as a philosophy. I just don't believe in the supernatural parts.
Well, I believe in the supernatural parts because they've been proven scientifically.
You said that earlier, but I still don't have any links.
I still don't have any links. Concrete, have you sent those links over to Jason? If he's still there.
Looks like he sent me something. Hold on.
I want the links that prove that supernatural exists. Just one or two is fine. You can give me all of them, but the top 3 is fine.
Shall I move
I've never seen or heard that exists.
Yeah, well, you have to read more. You have to keep up with the latest literature.
Well, that's what I'm asking for, the whatever links you have, so that I can get caught up.
Yeah, you keep asking. I think, that's enough asking. You will get them. So, can we move to the next line of evidence, which is the historical documentation? So, when historians, whether they're theists or secular historians, they have
of that with him. So I think it's more Matt in this instance than pre-subs in general.
I can't speak for Matt. I know who he is, obviously, and I've been in chats, with him before, not personally, but I've seen his style of debate, and I'm not trying to defend or excuse him or whatever, but it just seems like this is one of the, I don't want to call it a problem with the position of the presuppositionalist, but this just seems like one of those. It's like these reductive rabbit trails where if I can pigeonhole your definition or change it, my understanding of what you were asking is for what you meant by a logical definition of a tautology, that a statement would be, if I can explain it, that it would be true by virtue of the form of the art, the form of the statement, right? Exactly. Not that it's saying the same thing. It's true by necessity. And I'm not sure. I'm very new to either arguing or kind of discussing presuppositional apologetics. I find it as a Christian, I find it to be compelling, but I feel like I'm missing so many pieces to it because it doesn't. There are it raises more questions. It just seems so difficult, like the transcendental argument. Rhodey and I.
But always going back and referring back to a social reality, a historical moment, and a theological understanding of existence that was relevant at the time.
Yeah, but I mean, your association with analytic philosophy was like Jordan Peterson and I forget who the other person is. You know, so
no,
I'm kind of curious what
I was joking. It's just that I don't see where I just don't see where analytical philosophy exists today outside of research that, for instance, financial. Like, for instance, I read an amazing paper to
no, I don't
keep
think
on
that's
with
right
my
either.
joke. Like
I don't think that's.
the
I don't
Rand
think
Corporation did a great paper on monetizing security, where they figured out how much people were willing to get a discount on going to a baseball.
Yeah, that's also irrelevant. I think all these things are irrelevant. I think that there's a certain, forgetting even like the discipline. There's a certain type of practice where you're making progress in philosophy using a certain methodology, which seems different than the methodology used by continental philosophers. And I'm asking, what's the difference in that methodology? I mean, Philip would probably just.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I would assume you would just say one is using logic, the other is using something like a combination of logic and and the kind of like poetic.
I mean,
insight.
I suppose that. I mean, I think Jack would know better than I do. I mean,
So Jack, do you have an answer?
Jack is not here, I think.
I'll be back. Well, Philip, what's your second? What's your poor man's answer?
I mean,
I can't have Jack's.
I mean, like, I don't know. Like, the joke answer is like, well, one is just interested in being obscure, and the other isn't. But like, I don't really know. I mean, it's like, I suppose. I mean, some people like to just say it's like a geographical thing and like a style of writing.
No, but I don't think that's true though, because I think like I could make up two arguments right now, and you guys would know which one's analytic and which one's.
Well, I think
I agree with you. The thing is,
analytic.
Oh my God! Please, Serico, stop while I'm in the middle of a sentence. So I agree with that. And in fact, right, there's content. I mean, like, if you read, I'm not going to pronounce his name correctly because it's stupid, but like Sartre or whatever. I mean, you read his stuff, and he actually knows how to construct a sentence like a human being, and you can actually understand what he's saying. Whereas, like, somebody like Wittgenstein, right, and he's a continental philosopher, whereas somebody like Wittgenstein, it's like, he's very obscure and he's analytic, right? So it's not really the distinction.
So I'd almost say like analytic philosophy, right, is very paraphrasable for one thing. Would you agree? Meaning, in a way that continental philosophy is not as easily paraphrasable.
Well, can I say, like, I feel like one of the major differences is that continental philosophy, like, doesn't think we can think without thinking the place, the time, the people, the moment. Whereas in analytic philosophy, there's something immanent, which is a human nature, which I personally have rarely found as very defined. And I feel that usually, if I look back at European history uniquely, that divide has mostly got to do with the UK, and the UK having a lot of great economists, Ricardo, Adam Smith, and even Marx writing there, etc. And then, like, Germany, France having political thinkers and poets, which, like, earlier in the conversation, one of you joked about how continental philosophy is poetry, but I mean, life is. And I think that is something that you cannot extract from.
Well, no, but now you're just trying to make arguments for why it's legitimate. I'm not even talking about whether one is good or bad or better. I'm just saying, what is it closer to, and what's the difference?
I don't think I am, because they might be a human logic, which is immanence, and that exists beyond moments in history. Like,
that's an argument why one is good, but we're asking a different question, right? And that might be an interesting question, but that's a different question.
This is what I'm talking about.
Jack, is Jack back? And does he want to talk about?
What is it,
Jack? We're trying to understand a little bit better the difference between continental and analytic philosophy. Meaning, like, let's imagine there was a new argument, and you took one or the other approach. What would be the difference between the approaches?
I don't really see how the difference isn't anything more than a question of traditions. I mean, obviously there's going to be like stylistic generalizations you can make, but they're not going to be, as Philip pointed out, they're not going to be like 100% consistent, right? Because somebody like Wittgenstein, who's technically an analytic philosopher, is going to be much more obscure than somebody like Sartre, at least in some of his writings.
Yeah.
Technically a continental philosopher.
I mean, is one like more paraphrasable than the other, for example?
I think for the most part that's gonna be the case. But I think really what it amounts to is just that at some point the two traditions diverged.
Yeah, but what's different about the style? Like, even if that's how it evolved. I mean, look, obviously it's going to be a family resemblance until I hear the argument against family resemblance.
Yeah, maybe it's not.
Meaning, like, I'm sure that we're going to sometimes group people that are closer in style, or kind of still called continental due to the trajectory, but maybe are closer in style to analytic and vice versa. But there does seem to be two different kind of paths of addressing a question, right? Whether it's analytic and continental as the distinction.
It seems, I mean, Jack can answer, but like it just seems like with the analytic people, they're more interested in like just conceptual analysis, whereas the continental people are more interested in just like presenting views without like really, I mean, analyzing like the implications of those views or something.
Meaning, how do you defeat a continental philosopher? How do you show a continental philosopher that they're wrong? Is it the same method you would?
You read a shittier story. You present that to them, and then they say,
as opposed to showing an analytic philosopher that they're wrong. Like would you take the same methodology?
Now your leader is back. I'll put forward my argument again. I just feel that analytic philosophy bases itself on the idea that there is an immanent logic that we can work with, whereas continental philosophy believes that there is no logic outside of a historical moment.
Yeah, okay. Jack, do you have an answer to Ian's question? Because I don't.
How do you convince them that they're wrong? How do you show that they're wrong?
No, meaning would your response to an analytic, like if you were if you were making an argument against an analytical philosopher versus a continental philosopher, would you be taking the same approach? Like, could you take the way you talk, Jack? Let's start with the way you talk, right? Would those be arguments against continental?
Basically admit that the possibility of a God isn't really so much as a possibility, it's an inevitability, and they should.
Sorry about that, I was just doing something. Let's see what's going on here.
Can study the supernature, and that's when Gavin shut up and didn't defend that science can study the supernature. He capitulated to Darth, who said it was a category error. So what is it, Gavin? Is it a category error like your daddy Darth says, or can we actually in fact study the supernatural with scientific tools?
I can remember.
Darth said it was a category error.
I can remember that conversation with Darth, just vaguely.
But you didn't back up your stance. You let him take the reins of it.
One mic.
You let him run with it.
One mic. But again, I come back to quoting Dr. Edward Kelly, who's on the staff at the Division of Perceptual Studies, and he says the supernatural exists.
Provide that paper. What paper is that?
Real quick.
Hang on, what did he say?
Do you agree with Darth?
Hang on.
Do you agree with Darth that it's a category
whether we like
error,
it or not, this is what he said.
Do you agree with Darth?
He said whether we like it or not, the supernatural. Dominic, you're going into the audience. You're going into the audience because you just can't be quiet. Yeah. So Edward Kelly, one of the researchers, says when they were doing a panel demonstration, a panel talk with and the audience was scientists and medical staff, and his quote was the supernatural. This is going by their 50 years of research. The supernatural exists, and science is going to have to come to grips with this fact somehow. That's his very quote. So there you have access to hundreds of peer-reviewed papers. So you can take your time and sift through them. And I am not going to fish out what I consider to be the best 2 or 3 or 4 for you guys.
This is a
You guys have to
horrible
do
line
some
of
work
argumentation.
yourself.
There's a horrible line of argumentation. I swear. I understand why sometimes, Gavin, you debate with other people and you look like a joke. I swear, like to come on here and say that, oh, I have evidence that supports scientific evidence supports the existence of God, but then you just spam out a bunch of shit and say, hey, go sift through it. Just you should be able to provide me the very specific papers that support your
you,
position.
Jason?
You can't.
Jason, how many debates have you done on YouTube?
Well, I mean, I go on streams all the time and have debates with people.
So you've done no formal debates on YouTube?
Yeah, what do you mean? What formal debates? What's a formal debate? Like you debate?
Okay, so you don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, let's get on to our second line of evidence, which is the historical documentation. So we've already worked out that there are way more copies of the original manuscript when it comes to the New Testament, and comparing the New Testament against the works of Homer and Plato. So that gives historians high confidence. In part. But the next mechanism that they employ is what they call how much time has elapsed between the actual event that's being recorded in these writings of antiquity and the first copy. Because remember, there's no original manuscripts. So how much time has elapsed between the event and the first legible copy? So for the works of Plato, there's a 1,300-year gap between the original manuscripts and the first copy. For the works of Homer, there's a 400-year gap between the original manuscript, which is no longer available, and the first copy. When it comes to the New Testament, there's a bit of a range here, because there is conjecture over different books. Remember, because the Bible's not just one book; it's a collection of books, 66 books. So there's conjecture here, but there is fairly consistent consensus that you can look at a range of between 20 to 65 years from the resurrection to the actual writing and completion of the New Testament. So anywhere between 20 and 65 years. It can't be any later than 65 years, because John the Apostle was the last one to write write text for the Bible, and he died in 95 AD in Ephesus. So that's where it ends. So between 20 and 65 years. Now, that's not much. That's not much when you're talking about something that's 20 centuries old. It's just an eye blink. So as far as how much time elapsed between the actual event and the first copy, the New Testament gets a big tick beside it compared to the works of Homer and the works of Plato. Right? Tick, tick, 2 ticks. The last one is how many variances are there in the number of copies. So what historians did, what they did what they do is with all the 6,000 copies of the New Testament, they go through each copy and they mark any variance in the text. They mark a variance. And it turns out that the New Testament has, believe it or not, 200,000 textual differences. But a textual difference is can be something like a totally different doctrine, or it can be a spelling mistake or a grammar mistake. And by far, by miles, the number of errors in the New Testament, or the large number of errors, the 200,000 number of errors, are because there are so many copies, which means you're going to get more errors. But most of the errors, most of them are spelling or grammar errors. For example, in one copy, the word John might be spelled John, or in another copy, it'll be spelled John. And so that'll be marked as a variance, as a difference, right? Importantly, what happens, what historians have found, is that with all of the copies of the New Testament, none of the close to 6,000 copies of the New Testament have any variance whatsoever concerning doctrine at all. They're all uniformly the same. So, that is a tick. Because the amount of variances in the New Testament copies comes down to about 1%. 1% variance across the whole 6,000 or close to 6,000 copies. So 3 ticks in a row. There you go. Objective historical documentation. So the third line, does anyone want to talk about that? The historical documentation? Okay, well, I'll move on to the next one, and that is eyewitness testimony. And this is one where atheists like to just hand wave away, but eyewitness testimony is still accepted in US courts today. And if I can just get to it, just give me a sec here. The eyewitness testimony was a lot, and if it was admissible in the courts today, it would form very strong evidence. Okay, so there was a pre-Pauline creed that was in wide circulation no less than 2 years after the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ, and not later than 3 years. And this pre-Pauline creed said exactly this. It's not very long, I'll read it. It says, "For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins, according to the scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures. And that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12. After that he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, and then to all the apostles." So soon after his death, Jesus' followers believed that he was raised from death by God and exalted to the divine status of Lord, or Kyrios in the Greek. The account of the resurrection appearances of Jesus in verses 3 through 7 of 1 Corinthians 15 is an early pre-Pauline creedal
will free
when women don't really understand what average men are going through, and then when people speak about incels like they're the fucking Taliban, Jesus, these guys are.
But what's so wrong
Jesus,
with being
pussy, and that's 99% of them are harmless, and nobody cares about them. 99.9% of them are so harmless they don't even leave their house. And we're talking about the weakest, most invisible men in society,
Sure,
like they're time bombs. Come on.
Sure, but
they're time bombs
but
based
they're
off the idea.
product of the society, and of course, what people are talking most about is the things that they hear most about, and that is the people who actually went out there, the incels, to hurt other people. And of course, everybody know that there is a large number. Most people don't go out and do that, but those are the people we hear about.
And they're time bombs based off the idea that today, because of the
not all at the same time. So, does anyone else want to raise an objection to eyewitness testimony? All right, so we'll move on to our fourth line of objective evidence, and this is expert witness evidence from theologians, historians, and philosophers. Would anyone like to challenge that?
Oh, Teresa, you can talk right now. That's fine. Yeah, well, there are many problems with one way because I think he uses like general terminology that he's not. I don't think he really understands the terms. Like he understands the general concept, but he doesn't really know like specifics.
Do you have any examples? I'll assume that you're right. I think you probably are, but I'm trying to think of do you have any specific examples if you object to what he says?
Oh yeah. So, for example, I talked to him not long ago about the analytic synthetic distinction paper that Quine made based on a series of lectures that he did in the Vienna Circle, and he knew like the general ideas, but he didn't knew like the specifically the terms. The second thing is that when people try to talk, including myself, about, for example, different types of entailments, where you have material conditional and strict. So when you have entailment, and the difference between entailment and strict entailment, and he confused about those two. He was confused about like many different terms. Like right now, I can't remember more examples, but I think those.
No, I understand. I mean, it's impossible.
Sufficiently demonstrate.
So the material condition.
That's something. Yeah. And another thing, he talked about. He didn't know anything, for example, about deflationary theory of truth, and I tried, and then he said that it's somewhat connected to contextualism, which is not. That's also like a big blunder. He talked also to Josh about different like logics and what it means for something to be valid or sound, and he didn't know the meanings of those two. Well, yeah, again, that's just to demonstrate it. He knows a little bit about the subject, and for some reason, he talking about those stuff with great amount of confidence, but without the actual knowledge. So his confidence is not really justified.
Gotcha. So about strict entailments and material entailments, my understanding is a material entailment is like if this then that, like, right? Then what is a strict entailment?
Strict entailment is to say that under any possible world, if A then B. Sorry, 1 second. Can you hear me? Jeff?
I mean, I can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you asking something, Jeff? Jeff, I can't hear you. JT, can you hear Jeff?
No, I couldn't hear Jeff. He might be rejoining.
Yeah.
I'm asking if a strict designator was like or strict entailment was like a rigid designator. Those were similar.
Yeah, you can think about it as a rigid designator. The point of designation is that it's supposed to be about terms, but you can think about it as also in entailments.
Okay.
So the point that David Lewis said is that if you think about all the what the material implication logically equivalent to is that if A entails B, then it is equivalent to not A or B, right, Jeff? And that's the problem with this. Again, you're muted. Well, yeah, and the problem with this is that you can give this type of an argument that provides you with some kind of an arsenal that you don't want it to provide. So let me give you an example. You can say something like, if the moon is smaller than the sun, then Rodi likes ice cream. The moon is smaller than the sun, therefore Rodi likes ice cream. Right? Now, in this case, that's absurd to say something like that. Right? It sounds weird. Why, if the moon is smaller than the sun, what is the connection between that and me liking ice cream? Well, under the logical connective, under this type of an analysis, that's totally fine. I'm talking syntactically speaking. What David Lewis suggested then is to say the material implication needs to be converted to strict implication, where strict implication means that if A then B is a true proposition under any possible world. And this is why there was the introduction of possible worlds. Well, one of the things why there was the introduction of possible worlds into propositional logic. Does that make any sense, Jeff?
I think so. Is that related to the H2O being water? Not possible.
No. It's not that related. No.
Okay.
Because H2O being water is, you might think of it as some kind of a rigid designator, if it is a rigid designator. But I'm not talking about that. I'm more talking about how implications work under any logic. And the strict implication is something that's supposed to be to answer different type of absurdities over the regular implication, where there is a possible world where the moon is bigger than the sun, but Rodi still likes ice cream. Or sorry, there is a possible world where the moon is smaller than the sun, but Rodi doesn't like ice cream, and this is what makes the strict implication to be somewhat correct, conceptually speaking. Does that make any sense?
I think it does. You're trying to demarcate between strict and material, because material could be any other way in a different possible world.
Just think about this proposition. Now, are you familiar with propositional logic?
I mean, kinda.
Well, so let's suppose just like a regular modus ponens. If A then B, A therefore B. Okay? Now, the point here to make is that, well, you're not really familiar with propositional logic, so it's...
Well, I know enough. I think follow for this.
Okay, if you know enough, then you probably are familiar a little bit with truth tables.
Sure.
Am I correct, Adam? Yeah, cool. So the material implication is logically equivalent to, A then B is logically equivalent to not A or B. Does that make any sense, Jeff?
Yeah, I've looked at that truth table before. I can't memorize it, but that does make sense to me. Yes.
That's totally fine. It's not that important. The point here is that it's logically equivalent to not A or B. That's what it is equivalent to. So the only condition for not A or B to be false is to have A and not B. That's the only condition for this proposition to be false.
Gotcha.
Right. Now, in this case, I can say to you something like, if the moon is smaller than the sun, then...
They're still in there. Oh. Oh, the mics. They must have all fallen asleep. Oh, they've all fallen asleep. Right. I'll call it a day with that.